Body Knows, episode 12, Trauma Loops and the Body's Time Machine. Hello, and welcome back to The Body Knows. In our last episode, When the Past Won't Stay Past, we explored how trauma doesn't just disappear into the past. It replays in the present through panic, through silence, through freeze, through dissociation, through the loops that trap us, and the cultural wounds that ripple across generations. But today, we go deeper into one of trauma's most disorienting effects, its relationship with time. Because trauma doesn't just repeat, it bends time. The science of trauma time. Have you ever had a smell, a sound, or even a glance pull you instantly back decades? Not as a faded memory, but as if you were right there, reliving the moment? That's not a weakness. That's not imagination. That's the body as a time machine. This episode is about the science of trauma time, how the brain and nervous system collapse chronology, why flashbacks feel like time travel, and how survivors live in a strange blend of past and present. We'll explore neuroscience, personal experience, and philosophy. And we'll ask, if the body warps time, what does it mean to heal? Let's begin. The machinery of trauma time. To understand trauma time, we need to look at three key brain regions: the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala, the alarm bell. The amygdala is the brain's threat detector. It reacts instantly to danger. But here's the catch. It doesn't care about chronology. If something feels dangerous, it fires, whether it's a stranger shouting today or a parent shouting 30 years ago. To the amygdala, both are the same. The hippocampus, the timekeeper. The hippocampus normally situates memory in time and place. It tags experiences with "this was yesterday," or "this was 10 years ago." But under trauma, high levels of cortisol impair hippocampal function. Memories get stored without timestamps. Later, when recalled, they feel current, alive, happening right now. The prefrontal cortex, the storyteller, the prefrontal cortex interprets and regulates. It's the rational storyteller that says, "this was then, this is now." But during trauma, blood flow diverts away from it. Its ability to regulate collapses. The story falls apart, leaving raw sensation. Put together, this creates trauma time. The amygdala shouts danger. The hippocampus fails to say what was past. The prefrontal cortex loses control of the narrative. The result? A body convinced it's back inside the event. Step-by-step breakdown. The ignition of a flashback. Let's walk through this in real time. 1. Trigger appears: a slammed door, a harsh tone, the smell of alcohol. Something reminiscent of the original trauma. 2. Amygdala fires, it recognizes the similarity and screams danger. 3. Cortisol surges, stress hormones flood the system, preparing for fight, flight, or freeze. 4. Hippocampus misfires, it can't situate the memory in the past, so the present collapses into the past. 5. Prefrontal cortex shuts down, rational thought goes offline. You can't think your way out. 6. Body reacts as if past is present, panic, collapse, shutdown. This is why survivors say, "it felt like I was back there," because biologically, in a sense they were. Why trauma time feels endless. Trauma also distorts duration. Survivors describe a 5-second flashback that feels like it lasts forever. Dissociation that erases hours, leaving gaps. Dreams and nightmares replaying scenes on a loop. This is sometimes called temporal disintegration. Trauma doesn't just hurt, it dismantles time itself. Case study. The startle response. Imagine someone who grew up in a violent home. Years later, they hear a neighbor slam a door. The body jolts, heart races, adrenaline floods. Rationally, they know it's just a door. But their body are back in childhood, waiting for the explosion. This isn't an overreaction, it's trauma time. Personal reflection, my sense of collapsed time. I've lived this collapse of time myself. There were moments in relationships when a tone of voice froze me instantly. It wasn't just memory, it was reliving. My nervous system didn't distinguish. The decades between dissolved. Later I'd ask, why can't I separate now from then? The answer was simple. My hippocampus wasn't tagging, my amygdala was screaming, my prefrontal cortex had gone offline. I wasn't remembering. I was time traveling against my will. This is one of the hardest things to explain to people who haven't lived it. From the outside, it looks like oversensitivity. From the inside, it's the collapse of time itself. Philosophical echoes. Philosophers and mystics have long spoken about time bending and suffering. Nietzsche's Eternal Return imagines reliving the same moment endlessly. Trauma loops made into metaphysics. Buddhist samsara describes cycles of suffering that repeat until awareness breaks them. Trauma is samsara embodied. Henry Bergson distinguished clock time from lived time, at the difference that trauma survivors feel sharply. Augustine asked, "What is time?" His answer, "Past lives in memory, future in anticipation, present in attention." Trauma disrupts all three. These reflections remind us, trauma doesn't just hurt the body, it warps the very fabric of lived time. Why this matters. Understanding the science of trauma time matters because it breaks shame. Survivors often berate themselves. Why am I still stuck? Why can't I move on? The truth is, your body isn't choosing this. Trauma disrupted your time machinery. Healing isn't about erasing memory, but about teaching the body. Now is not then. Closing part 1. So that's the science of trauma time, the amygdala as alarm, the hippocampus as broken timekeeper, the prefrontal cortex as silent storyteller. Together, they make the body a time machine, one that pulls us back without asking permission. In the next part, we'll explore the difference between chronological time and trauma time, how the nervous system collapses years into moments, and why trauma survivors often live in both the past and present simultaneously. Trauma time versus chronological time. When most people think of time, they picture clocks, calendars, and schedules. Linear progression, seconds into minutes, minutes into hours, days into years. We call this chronological time. But for trauma survivors, time doesn't flow this way. It loops, collapses, and expands. One moment becomes every moment. A second feels eternal. Years of distance vanish in an instant. This is trauma time. Chronological time, the social agreement chronological time, is the kind we all agree upon. It organizes society. It structures work and education. It allows us to coordinate, to meet, to build. Psychologists call it clock time. It's measurable, external, and objective. But here's the thing. Human beings don't actually live in clock time. We live in lived time, the felt sense of duration, presence, memory. When you're in joy, hours fly by. When you're in pain, minutes drag endlessly. Trauma amplifies this distortion to an unbearable level. Trauma time, the collapsed trauma time, is when the nervous system replays the past as if it is present. It doesn't just recall, it relives. Features of trauma time. Collapsing distance, events from decades ago feel immediate. Fragmented sequence, memories replay out of order or without sequence. Duration distortion, seconds feel like hours. Hours vanish into blanks. Looping, the same memory or sensation replays compulsively. In trauma time, yesterday and 20 years ago collapse into now. Scenario, the sound of keys. Imagine an adult sitting at home. They hear the sound of keys jangling at the door. Suddenly, their chest tightens. They're not just hearing keys. They're back in childhood, waiting for a parent to enter, drunk and unpredictable. Chronologically, they're in 2025, sitting in their flat. But in trauma time, they're 8 years old again. The decades dissolve. The body doesn't know the difference. The neuroscience of collapsed time. In part 1, we outlined the brain's key players. Here's how they function specifically in trauma time. Amygdala fires instantly, detecting threat. Doesn't distinguish past from present. Hippocampus fails to tag memory with time-place, collapsing chronology. Prefrontal cortex goes offline, unable to regulate or contextualize. The result, raw sensation without narrative. That's why flashbacks don't feel like memories. They feel like happenings. Philosophy of time and trauma philosophers have long wrestled with time, and trauma gives their theories visceral proof. St. Augustine said time lives in the soul, past in memory, future in anticipation, present in attention. Trauma fractures this balance. The past overwhelms the present, and the future feels foreclosed. Bergson distinguished clock time from duration, the flow of lived experience. Trauma shows how duration can stretch infinitely or collapse. Heidegger saw humans as beings toward death, shaped by temporality. Trauma forces us into a distorted relationship with mortality, the sense that danger never ends. Buddhism speaks of samsara, endless cycles of suffering until awareness intervenes. Trauma loops are samsara in the nervous system. These perspectives remind us trauma isn't just a clinical condition, it's an existential crisis of time. Personal reflection. Living in 2 times at once, I've lived the double exposure of trauma time. There were moments when I'd sit in a room, outwardly calm, but inside I was in another decade. My body carried the tension of being a child again, waiting, anticipating, fearing. The people around me saw the adult. I felt both the adult and the child at once. It's hard to explain how destabilizing this is, to live in 2 times simultaneously. To drink coffee in 2025 while your nervous system is still trapped in 1995. This is why trauma survivors often say, I never feel fully present, because part of them is always elsewhere, elsewhen. Trauma time in relationships magnify the distortions of trauma time. A partner raises their voice. Chronological time says, they're upset today. Trauma time says, I'm back in my childhood bedroom. A friend cancels plans. Chronological time says, they're busy. Trauma time says, I've been abandoned again. Intimacy begins. Chronological time says, this is safe. Trauma time says, this is danger. The body doesn't consult the clock. It consults memory, sensation, and survival. The pain of being misunderstood. One of the cruelest parts of trauma time is being judged by those who live only in chronological time. Why can't you move on? That was years ago. You're overreacting. They speak from clock time. But survivors live in trauma time where the past is not past. The gap between these worlds creates shame, isolation, and self-doubt. Trauma time and cultures too replay trauma in collapsed time. Nations repeat wars as if old wounds never closed. Communities carry a collective memory of colonization or slavery. Political rhetoric reactivates chosen trauma to mobilize fear. Here, trauma time isn't just personal. It's collective. The past intrudes into the present of societies. Skeptical voices. Some psychologists caution against overstretching the idea of trauma time. They argue not all triggers collapse time. Sometimes responses are conditioned associations. Trauma loops may exaggerate the past's grip. The language of time collapse risks, making healing seem impossible. These critiques matter. But they don't negate the lived reality of survivors who experience time distortion as an undeniable truth, healing the split between times. So, how do we begin to bridge chronological time and trauma time? Grounding practices. Remind the body of the here and now. Therapy, EMDR, somatic experiencing, and polyvagal informed work can reintegrate memory. Narrative work. Journaling, storytelling, reframing, restoring sequence to fragmented memory. Rituals. Symbolic acts can give closure where time never did. Healing doesn't erase trauma time, but it teaches the nervous system, now is not then. Personal reflection, my gradual re-entry into chronological time for me. Reclaiming chronological time has been slow. Journaling helped me sequence events that once felt jumbled. Grounding helped me remind myself, this is 2025, I am here. Relationships, though painful, gave me mirrors to see how often I lived elsewhere in time. Each small act was like reteaching my body the calendar. Step by step, moment by moment, year by year, I began to feel something I hadn't for years, presence. Chronological time is the clock. Trauma time is the loop. Survivors live in both at once, pulled between calendars and flashbacks, between social schedules and nervous system alarms. Understanding this difference is vital, because without it, survivors are shamed for not living in clock time. And with it, we can begin to heal, teaching the body that the past, though remembered, is not still happening. In the next part, we'll zoom in on flashbacks themselves, the most vivid example of trauma time travel. We'll break down exactly how they unfold, and what happens step by step when the body collapses time into now. Flashbacks as time travel flashbacks are among the most disorienting experiences of trauma. They are not just memories, they are re-experiences. To the nervous system, they are time travel, collapsing years into seconds, making the past indistinguishable from the present. In this part, we'll explore how flashbacks ignite in the brain and body, step-by-step breakdown of what happens physiologically, a scenario of an adult triggered by a childhood sound, the difference between visual flashbacks and emotional ones, philosophical reflections on what it means to relive time, personal echoes of my own flashbacks and how I learned to read them, practices that can help ground the body when time collapses. Flashbacks, not memories, but relivings. Most people think of memory as something like a film reel. You press play and you watch the past, but you remain anchored in the present. Flashbacks don't work that way. A flashback is the collapse of distance. You don't just watch the film, you fall into it. This is why survivors say, I was back there. It felt like it was happening all over again. I couldn't tell if it was memory or reality. That language isn't metaphorical. It's descriptive of the body's reality. Two types of flashbacks. One, visual flashbacks. These are the most well-known, vivid images, scenes replaying in the mind's eye. Example, a combat veteran sees the battlefield when hearing fireworks. 2. Emotional flashbacks, less visible but equally powerful. Sudden waves of shame, fear, dread, or despair with no image attached. The body is reliving, but the mind can't supply a picture. Example, someone suddenly feels worthless and terrified in a group without knowing why. Both types are time travel. One provides imagery, the other pure sensation. Scenario, the slamming door. Let's walk through a flashback step by step. An adult is sitting at home. They hear the neighbor slam a door. 1. Trigger detected. The sound resembles a childhood memory, a parent storming into the room. The auditory cortex recognizes the sound. 2. Amygdala alarm. The amygdala fires danger. Adrenaline surges, muscles tense. 3. Hippocampus collapse. The hippocampus should tag this as now safe neighbor, but under stress it fails. The memory floods in without a timestamp. 4. Prefrontal shutdown. Rational thought shuts down. The adult can't reassure themselves. That was then, this is now. They are engulfed. 5. Full body re-experience. Heart races, breath shortens, stomach clenches. Vision may narrow, hearing may distort. For a moment, they are 8 years old again, waiting for the storm. Aftermath. Even once calm returns, exhaustion lingers. The nervous system has burned through energy. Shame follows. Why did I overreact? But it wasn't an overreaction. It was time travel. The neuroscience of flashbacks researchers describe flashbacks as the intrusion of unintegrated memory. Unlike ordinary memory, which is contextualized, trauma memory is stored as fragments, images, sensations, emotions. During a flashback, these fragments re-emerge raw, unsequenced. The prefrontal cortex, which normally constructs narrative, fails to assemble them. Instead, the amygdala and sensory cortices dominate. That's why flashbacks feel like nowness. The memory is not labeled as past. Philosophical reflections. What is re-experiencing? Flashbacks raise profound philosophical questions. Is it a flashback memory or event? Survivors insist it feels like an event. Philosophers of time, like Husserl, argue that consciousness always carries retention, the just past, and pretension, the about to happen. Trauma collapses that flow, retention overwhelms. Nietzsche's eternal return, the idea of reliving the same moment endlessly. Flashbacks are a psychological eternal return. Buddhist samsara, cycles of rebirth and suffering until awareness breaks the loop. Flashbacks embody samsara in lived experience. Modern neuroscience suggests flashbacks are time travel without control, the body's archive erupting into the present. Personal reflection, my flashbacks, I've lived these collapses of time. I remember moments when frustration boiled into sudden rage, and I felt self back in childhood, helpless, cornered, unseen. It wasn't a thought, it was a body state. My muscles, my breath, my voice carried decades-old echoes. Other times, shame hit me in groups, a wave so strong I couldn't speak. People saw silence. Inside, I was in classrooms again, being put on the spot, shamed for not knowing the answer. What I've learned is this: flashbacks aren't a weakness. They're survival responses replaying. They're the nervous system saying, we still need to process this. The social dimension of flashbacks don't only isolate, they impact relationships. A partner raises their voice, the survivor relives parental rage. A friend forgets a promise, the survivor relives abandonment. A colleague criticizes, the survivor relives humiliation. To others, the reaction seems disproportionate. But in trauma time, it is proportionate, because the body is responding to decades-old danger. This gap between perspectives creates painful misunderstandings. Survivors feel ashamed, others feel confused. Trust erodes. Collective flashbacks aren't only individual. Communities can relieve collective trauma. Nations revisit wars through memorial days, speeches, and rhetoric. Political leaders invoke past wounds to stir fear or loyalty. Media images trigger echoes of past atrocities. Here, the collective nervous system time travels. The past is resurrected in the body of the group. Practices for when time collapses. So what helps when flashbacks erupt? 1. Grounding in the present, look around. Name 5 things you see, touch a surface. Feel its texture. Remind yourself, this is now, not then. 2. Anchor objects, carry a grounding stone, bracelet, or card. Hold it when triggered. Let it remind your body of the present. 3. Breathwork, slow exhale activates the vagus nerve. Inhale 4, exhale 6, repeat. 4. Safe witnessing, tell someone you trust, I'm having a flashback. Being witnessed interrupts isolation. 5. Journaling after, write down what happened. Give sequence to what felt chaotic. Skeptical views. Some critics argue that calling flashbacks time travel risks exaggeration. They suggest flashbacks are just conditioned responses. But neuroscience shows otherwise. Sensory cortices light up as if stimuli are present. The amygdala responds as if danger is real. Survivors' reports align across cultures. It felt like now. Flashbacks may not literally bend time, but they bend lived time, which is what matters most. Flashbacks are not just memories. They are eruptions of the past into the present. They collapse chronology, distort perception, and replay sensations as if danger is here again. Understanding them changes the narrative. Survivors are not overreacting. They are enduring involuntary time travel. In the next part, we'll look at another distortion of time: dissociation. If flashbacks are time collapsing into too much now, dissociation is the opposite: time dissolving into no now at all. Dissociation and timelessness. If flashbacks are the body's time machine, dragging us back into the past, dissociation is the body's time machine, rejecting us from the present. One overwhelms us with too much memory. The other strips us of memory altogether. Both distort our sense of time, both are survival. What is dissociation? Dissociation is the nervous system's emergency brake. When fight, flight, and even freeze are exhausted, the body shuts down awareness. It shows up as spacing out, feeling detached from the body, losing track of time, blanks in memory, watching oneself from the outside. For survivors, dissociation can feel like timelessness. Hours vanish, minutes feel unreal, presence dissolves. The physiology of dissociation polyvagal theory helps us understand dissociation. Ventral vagal state, safe and social, body feels safe, engaged. Sympathetic state, fight, flight, body mobilizes to act. Dorsal vagal state, shutdown, when escape isn't possible, the system collapses. In dorsal vagal shutdown, blood pressure drops, energy drains, and awareness fades. Time feels absent. Scenario: the classroom freeze. Imagine a child in school. They are suddenly called upon by a shouting teacher. At first, their heart races, sympathetic arousal. They look for escape but can't. No running, no fighting. The body defaults to shutdown, dorsal vagal activation. The child goes silent. Outside, it looks like stubbornness. Inside, it feels like being underwater. Time slows, the moment stretches. Later, they may not remember the details at all. The nervous system protected them by ejecting awareness. Dissociation and timelessness. Dissociation warps time differently than flashbacks. Flashbacks, the past floods the present. Too much now. Dissociation, the present vanishes. No now at all. Survivors describe, I lost hours. I don't remember how I got here. It was like watching someone else's life. This timelessness protects the psyche from unbearable overwhelm, but it also robs life of continuity. Personal reflection. My dissociation, I felt this shut down myself. There were times when frustration boiled over into rage, and afterwards, I couldn't recall details. Time blurred. Other times I'd sit in a group and suddenly feel like I wasn't really there, my body present, my mind elsewhere. As a child, during meltdowns, the aftermath often felt like blanks. I could feel the exhaustion in my body, but not remember the sequence. This left me struggling to explain myself, trying to piece together what had happened. Adults only saw behavior, never the blackout. Living with dissociation is like having pieces of your life missing. You survive, but at the cost of continuity. Philosophy of timelessness philosophers and mystics have long described states that sound like dissociation. Meister Eckhart spoke of detachment, a loss of self that feels outside time, but he was chosen. Trauma's detachment is not. Phenomenology of Husserl. Consciousness always holds now, just past, and about to be. Dissociation collapses this structure, leaving only emptiness. Buddhism. Nirvana is the cessation of suffering. Dissociation mimics cessation, but without liberation. It's survival, not enlightenment. The resemblance is striking, but trauma's timelessness lacks peace. It is absence, not transcendence. Dissociation in relationships. Dissociation confuses relationships deeply. A partner asks, "Where did you go just now?" A survivor blanks during conflict, leaving the other feeling ignored. In intimacy, survivors may suddenly detach, watching themselves from outside. To others this seems cold or uncaring. In reality, it is survival. The nervous system shut down awareness because staying present felt too unsafe. Society and dissociation cultures can dissociate too. Communities numb themselves to violence. Societies forget atrocities, leaving gaps in collective memory. Nations avoid accountability, acting as if past abuses never occurred. Just as individuals lose continuity, so do cultures. Historical trauma vanishes into silence. The cost of dissociation. Dissociation protects, but it costs. Lost memory, fragmented identity. Struggles with continuity. Difficulty trusting one's own perception. It is double-edged. It saves in the moment, but it steals from life. Skeptical views. Some critics argue that dissociation is overdiagnosed. They point out, everyone zones out sometimes. Not all blankness is trauma. Cultural expectations shape how dissociation is reported. These are valid cautions. But neuroscience shows genuine trauma dissociation involves distinct brain patterns, reduced prefrontal activity, altered limbic function, and shifts in connectivity. It is not mere daydreaming. Healing dissociation. How do we restore time when it disappears? 1. Grounding focus on senses, touch, sound, sight. Anchor in present cues. 2. Safe movement, gentle rocking, walking, and stretching to reawaken awareness. 3. Journaling, writing down what happened after dissociation rebuilds continuity. 4. Therapy, somatic experiencing, EMDR, and parts work can gently integrate lost fragments. 5. Compassion, recognize dissociation as protection, not weakness. Personal reflection, rebuilding my continuity. For me, healing dissociation has meant learning to stay in my body. Simple things, naming what I see, feeling my feet on the ground, and keeping a journal helped me reclaim pieces of time. It wasn't instant. It took years to learn how to remain present through distress. But each small act was like sewing the fabric of time back together. And slowly, I found I didn't lose hours as often. I began to feel continuity again. Flashbacks overwhelm us with too much presence of the past. Dissociation removes presence altogether. Both warp time. Both are survival responses, not choices. Understanding dissociation matters because it reframes absence. Survivors aren't careless, cold, or unreliable. They are navigating the body's ancient safety strategies. In the next part, we'll step back and look at the larger philosophical and cultural views of time, from Augustine to Buddhism, and how they illuminate trauma's strange relationship with chronology. Philosophical and cultural views of time. So far, we've looked at trauma time scientifically and experientially, how the brain collapses, chronology, how flashbacks drag us back, how dissociation ejects us from now. But trauma also forces us into ancient questions. What is time? Is it linear, cyclical, relative, or lived? And what happens when trauma scrambles these structures? Philosophers, mystics, and cultures have offered many answers. Trauma refracts them in startling ways. Augustine, the distended soul St. Augustine in Confessions, wrestled with the nature of time. He wrote, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to one that asketh, I know not." For Augustine, time exists in the soul, the past in memory, the future in anticipation, the present in attention. But trauma distends this soul unnaturally. The past overwhelms memory until it colonizes the present. The future feels foreclosed, trapped by the expectation of repetition. Attention dissolves into dread. In other words, trauma corrupts Augustine's balance. Bergson, duration versus a Clonry. Bergson distinguished two kinds of time: chronos, clock time, measurable, divisible, external. Duration, lived, qualitative, elastic. Trauma collapses durée into distortion. Seconds feel endless. Years vanish into blanks. The elasticity of lived time becomes torment instead of flow. Bergson saw duration as the essence of consciousness. Trauma proves it and shows how fragile it is. Heidegger, Being in Time, Martin Heidegger argued that human existence is defined by temporality. We are beings toward death, always projecting ourselves into the future. But trauma blocks projection. Survivors often say, I can't imagine a future. It feels like life stopped when it happened. In trauma, Heidegger's being toward death becomes being toward repetition. Instead of future openness, there is dread of recurrence. Nietzsche, eternal return Nietzsche, posed a haunting thought experiment. What if you had to live your life over and over, the same, eternally? For many trauma survivors, this isn't hypothetical. It's the felt reality of flashbacks and loops, the eternal return of dread. But Nietzsche challenged readers, could you embrace eternal return joyfully? Trauma survivors rarely can, but healing might be reimagining loops not as prisons, but as invitations to break patterns. Buddhism, Samsara Buddhism teaches samsara, cycles of suffering, rebirth after rebirth, until enlightenment breaks the loop. Trauma loops are samsara in the nervous system. The same pain repeats until awareness and compassion intervene. Practices like mindfulness and meditation aim to break the identification with the cycle. For survivors, similar practices, grounding and observing without judgment, can soften trauma loops. Modern philosophy, Ricoeur, and narrative Paul Ricoeur argued that humans make sense of time through narrative. We organize past, present, and future into a story. Trauma disrupts this. Memories fragment, sequencing collapses, narrative disintegrates. Survivors struggle to tell coherent stories. Healing, then, isn't just regulating the body. It's re-narrating time, giving sequence to chaos, stitching continuity back into lived experience. Cultural perspectives on time cultures shape how time is experienced. Western culture, linear time progress moving forward. Trauma is seen as an interruption. Survivors are urged to move on. Indigenous cultures, cyclical time where ancestors remain present. Trauma may be seen as an echo requiring ritual to restore balance. African philosophy, Ubuntu, community defines identity, trauma is shared. Time is relational, not individual. Eastern traditions, reincarnation frames trauma as a karmic cycle to be worked through across lives. Each worldview offers tools. Western linearity urges closure. Cyclical views allow trauma to remain present without shame. Communal views distribute the burden. Skeptical voices. Some philosophers warn against romanticizing trauma through metaphysics. They argue, trauma is neurobiology, not mysticism. Linking it to samsara or eternal return risks metaphorizing suffering. Survivors need grounding, not abstraction. This skepticism matters, but survivors often find resonance in metaphors. Philosophy can dignify what science reduces to mechanism. Both are needed. Personal reflection, my philosophy of time for me. Trauma distorted both linear and cyclical time. In meltdowns as a child, the present felt endless. Bergson's durée stretched unbearably. In adulthood, shame and flashbacks replayed like Nietzsche's eternal return. And dissociation felt like Augustine's loss of attention, no present at all. Philosophy gave me language for this. It reminded me I wasn't mad. Time itself was warped. But healing gave me something deeper, the possibility of narrative. Step by step, I began stitching events into the story, regaining continuity. Ricoeur was right, narrative is how we heal time. Philosophy shows us that trauma is not just pain. It's a crisis of temporality. Augustine, Bergson, Heidegger, Nietzsche, Buddhism all saw time as fragile, complex, lived. Trauma confirms it. For survivors, the past overwhelms memory, the future collapses, the present dissolves. But philosophy also offers hope. Loops can be broken, narratives can be restitched, time can be re-inhabited. In the next part, we'll turn back to the personal, how trauma loops pulled me into anger, shutdown, and mistrust, and how those loops became my teachers in understanding the body's time machine. Personal reflections, my loops in time. I've spoken so far about the science, the philosophy, and the cultural frames of trauma time, but I also want to bring it back into the body, my body, because none of this is abstract for me. I have lived trauma loops. I have felt the collapse of time. I have been pulled backwards into childhood states when all I wanted was to stay present. And I've learned, painfully, that the past doesn't ask for permission before it intrudes. In this part, I'll share some of my own loops, the ways anger, shutdown, and mistrust dragged me into timelessness. Not because I want sympathy, but because putting words to these experiences may help someone else recognize their own loops and know they aren't broken. They aren't weak, they're human. Anger as a time machine. When I was a child, frustration built inside me like pressure in a sealed container. I wanted to explain myself, to be understood, but I didn't yet have the language. I wasn't given the space. Adults expected me to comply, to behave, to fit the mold of what they thought a calm, obedient child should be. So the pressure built until it burst. My meltdowns weren't performances. They were eruptions, shouting, storming off, sometimes leaving the room entirely. Adults saw defiance. What they didn't see was the aftershock, because for days afterwards, my nervous system was wrecked. I couldn't reset quickly. The adrenaline had nowhere to go. The cortisol lingered. My whole body felt hijacked. And the worst part, being punished twice. First for the meltdown itself, and then again for the days of withdrawal that followed. People remembered the outburst, but not the weeks of calm. They labelled me by the eruption, not the stillness that surrounded it. Looking back, I see how those meltdowns were trauma time. They weren't just about the immediate trigger. They were echoes of every moment I'd been told to suppress. Every time I wasn't allowed to be heard. The anger wasn't only present, it was past, boiling over into now. Even as an adult, I felt anger pull me into loops. Someone dismisses me, or I sense betrayal, and suddenly the rage I feel isn't proportional to the moment. It's layered, it's decades thick, and afterwards the shame sets in. Why did I react like that? Why couldn't I control it? But I know now, it wasn't a lack of control. It was time to collapse, shut down as survival. Just as often as I erupted, I shut down. There were times I became so overwhelmed by noise, demand, or expectation that I went silent. Not because I didn't care, but because I literally couldn't speak. My body locked up. Later, when people pressed me, "What's wrong?" "Say something." The pressure only made it worse. I couldn't explain that it wasn't stubbornness. It was paralysis. The pain of being misunderstood in those shutdowns cut deep. It reinforced the loop. Because every time I couldn't explain, I was seen as defiant, difficult, or detached. And that taught me that my authentic responses were dangerous. Better to mask, better to disappear. Even now, as an adult, shutdown sneaks back. In moments of high stress, I go quiet. Words dry up. And once again, people misinterpret. They see coldness, withdrawal, maybe even arrogance. They don't see the body screaming beneath the silence. This is the loop of shutdown, a nervous system strategy mistaken for character. Mistrust and the loops of betrayal. One of the hardest loops I've lived is mistrust. When you've been gaslighted, triangulated, or betrayed, your body learns to expect it. I've been in relationships where gaslighting became so extreme that I recorded conversations just to have proof of what was said. And even when I presented the evidence, I was told I was wrong, gaslighting of the gaslighting, denial piled on denial. The nervous system can't help but encode that as danger. So later, even in safer contexts, mistrust lingers. I've walked into groups where I could feel the tension in the room, not just cognitively, but viscerally. A glance exchanged, a silence stretched too long, and my gut told me, I don't belong here. I'm being discussed behind my back. And often, I was right. Later, I found out the whispers had happened, and the conversations I sensed were real. My intuition wasn't paranoia. It was neuroception, my nervous system reading microsignals, detecting dissonance others pretended not to notice. This is how mistrust becomes a loop. You see clearly, you sense accurately, but you're dismissed for it. The body says danger, the group says you're imagining it. And so the cycle repeats: perception, dismissal, isolation, the loop of collective pain. It hasn't only been personal. I've felt trauma loops in the collective. I've written about how governments manipulate, gaslight, and project, using media narratives to split communities and vilify dissent. Watching those cycles unfold in society has triggered the same body states as my personal loops: rage, despair, shutdown. When I saw the Prime Minister label people far right simply for defending their homes or communities, it wasn't just political outrage. It was nervous system déjà vu, the same projection, the same silencing, the same loops of shame and dismissal I lived as a child, now playing out on a national stage. My body knew that loop before my mind did. Learning to see the loops. The hardest part of living these loops was not recognizing them. I thought they were me. I thought anger meant I was volatile. I thought shutdown meant I was weak. I thought mistrust meant I was paranoid. But these weren't character flaws. They were trauma loops, time collapsing into now, the nervous system repeating strategies that once kept me alive. Seeing that distinction has been life-changing. It didn't make the loops vanish overnight, but it gave me compassion for them. And compassion loosens the loop's grip. Practices that help me break loops. I don't want to romanticize, these loops still catch me. But I've learned practices that help. Body journaling, writing down sensations as they happen, anchoring them to time and place. Grounding through environment, deliberately naming where I am. This is 2025, not 1995. Safe relationships, allowing myself to be witnessed even if imperfectly. AI reflection tools. Surprisingly, speaking into systems like this one helped me make sense of my patterns, putting language to what once felt inexpressible. Compassion for my younger self, remembering that these loops were born in childhood when I had no other tools. Each practice stitched time back together, little by little. So these are some of my loops. Anger erupting decades deep, shutdown silencing me beyond words, mistrust echoing betrayals, collective triggers that ripple through society. They taught me that trauma isn't just pain, it's temporal distortion. It's the past replaying until awareness interrupts. Sharing this isn't about self-exposure. It's about solidarity. Because if you've lived loops like these, you know how lonely they can feel. But you're not alone, and you're not broken. In the next part, we'll widen the lens again, exploring how trauma time unfolds in relationships, how partners, friends, and families get pulled into each other's loops, and how repetition compulsion shapes the patterns we find ourselves trapped in. Trauma time in relationships. If trauma bends time inside a single body, what happens when two bodies, both carrying loops, come together? Relationships become theatres of repetition. Old wounds reenact themselves. The past intrudes into intimacy. The body responds not only to the partner in front of you, but to the ghosts behind them. This part is about how trauma time plays out relationally, in love, in family, in trust and betrayal. It's about repetition compulsion, Freud's term for the way we unconsciously restage unresolved trauma. And it's about how awareness can break these cycles before they devour connection. The nervous system as judge of love. When two people meet, their nervous systems are scanning. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory calls this neuroception, the unconscious detection of safety or danger. A soft voice, relaxed eyes lead to ventral vagal, safe and social. A sharp tone, harsh glance leads to sympathetic arousal, fight, flight. Cold silence, withdrawal leads to dorsal vagal shutdown, dissociation. In healthy contexts, neuroception builds connection. In trauma, it misfires. The body reads old threats into new interactions. This is how trauma time enters relationships. A partner isn't just a partner. They become a mirror of the past. Scenario: the raised voice. Imagine a couple arguing. One partner raises their voice. Chronological time says they're upset about the bills. But trauma time says, I'm back in childhood, hearing shouting that led to violence. The body doesn't distinguish. Heart races, stomach clenches, vision narrows. Fight, flight, freeze ignites. The argument shifts from the present issue to an ancient loop. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about bills, it's about survival. Repetition compulsion. Freud's trap. Freud called this repetition compulsion, the drive to repeat unresolved trauma in new relationships. A survivor of abandonment partners with someone emotionally unavailable. A survivor of criticism seeks approval from harsh figures. A survivor of betrayal finds themselves drawn to manipulators. It's not masochism. It's the nervous system seeking resolution, replaying the scene in hope of a different outcome. But without awareness, the outcome is usually the same. Personal reflection, loops in my relationships. I've lived these repetitions. I've been drawn to people who gaslit me, not because I wanted pain, but because my nervous system recognized the familiarity of dismissal. The loop replayed, their denial, my evidence, their deflection, my confusion. The cycle never ended. I felt mistrust echo into new connections, seeing betrayal before it arrived. Sometimes I was wrong, but often I wasn't. My nervous system picked up on patterns of avoidance, triangulation, and dishonesty, and when the betrayal came, the loop confirmed itself. I've also been on the other side, where my own shutdowns left partners feeling abandoned, even when I didn't intend it. My trauma loop collided with theirs, and neither of us could find the way back to safety. These aren't just stories, they're maps of how trauma collapses time inside intimacy. Attachment styles and trauma time. Modern psychology frames this through attachment theory. Anxious attachment, fear of abandonment, looping into protest behaviors. Avoidant attachment, fear of engulfment, looping into withdrawal. Disorganized attachment, swinging between both, looping in chaos. Attachment styles are trauma time in action. The child's past relationship with caregivers replays in adult love. When two people with unresolved trauma attach, their loops entwine. Arguments become rehearsals of childhood dramas. Love becomes a battlefield of ghosts. Scenario: betrayal and triangulation. Imagine a partner entertains another lover in secret. Their words say commitment, but their actions leak deception, late replies, inconsistent stories, and avoidance of intimacy. For the survivor, trauma time erupts. The betrayal isn't just about this partner. It's every betrayal before. The body floods with cortisol. Sleep breaks. Paranoia grows. And often the betrayer gaslights. You're imagining things. This adds a second loop, mistrust confirmed, intuition dismissed. This is how trauma time compounds in relationships. A single act of betrayal ignites a lifetime of wounds. Cultural mirrors of relational loops. Relationships don't happen in isolation. Culture scripts them. Media romanticizes toxic cycles, the push-pull, the drama, the jealousy as passion. Religion sanctifies suffering in relationships as virtue, making endurance of abuse seem holy. Politics manipulates relational trust through propaganda, gaslighting citizens like partners. These cultural mirrors normalize trauma loops. They tell us dysfunction is love, betrayal is expected, and silence is virtue. Survivors internalize the scripts, replaying them unconsciously. Philosophical reflections. The other, as mirror philosophers remind us, the other is always a mirror. Hegel. Self-consciousness emerges through recognition by another. Trauma disrupts recognition. You see not yourself, but your wound. Levinas. The face of the other commands ethical responsibility. Trauma time makes the other's face a threat. Merleau-Ponty. Embodiment shapes perception. Trauma alters embodiment, so the other is perceived through a distorted lens. In relationships, we don't just meet others. We meet ourselves and our trauma loops. Skeptical voices. Some argue the trauma lens risks fatalism. If every relationship is a loop, where's agency? It's a fair critique. Not every conflict is trauma. Not every misstep is past repeating. People can simply clash, miscommunicate, or disagree. But for survivors, dismissing loops risks re-traumatization. The balance is to acknowledge trauma time without reducing everything to it. Breaking loops in relationships. So how do we step out of repetition? Awareness, naming loops as they arise. Communication, sharing triggers with partners before they erupt. Boundaries, refusing to endure cycles of abuse disguised as love. Therapy, exploring attachment wounds and co-regulation. Self-compassion, recognizing loops as survival, not failure. Breaking loops doesn't mean erasing the past. It means refusing to let it script the present. Personal reflection, small escapes from loops. For me, breaking loops has been about micro choices. When anger rises, I pause before reacting sometimes. When mistrust whispers, I test it gently instead of assuming betrayal sometimes. When shutdown threatens, I tell someone, I'm overwhelmed, instead of disappearing. It's imperfect, loops still catch me. But each time I notice, each time I speak instead of silence, each time I pause instead of erupt, the loop loosens. And that loosening is freedom. Personal reflection, meeting my shadow in relationships. There's another truth I need to name, one that isn't comfortable, but it matters. Sometimes I notice my own shadow behaviors. When I was younger, I didn't know why. I didn't understand why I'd pull away when someone came too close, or why I'd react sharply when I felt vulnerable. These weren't choices, not conscious ones at least. They were reflexes, my own trauma loops playing out. But this time I was the one creating pain in others. I'm not perfect. I don't want to be portrayed as a saint or a martyr. The truth is, I've lived the duality. I've been the one harmed, but I've also unconsciously harmed. And it's only through my self-development and spiritual journey that I began to see it clearly. That realization was hard, but it was also freeing. Because once I became more self-aware, I could take action. I could notice when I was shutting someone out, when I was mistrusting before trust had even been tested, when I was letting anger spill onto people who didn't deserve it. And here's something beautiful I learned. Self-awareness doesn't just heal me, it heals those I'm connected to. Through the mirror neuron effect, our nervous systems resonate with each other. When I interrupt a loop in myself, when I soften, when I choose openness instead of mistrust, calm instead of anger, presence instead of shutdown, it doesn't just change my state. It invites the other person into a different state too. This is how healing ripples outward. My healing makes room for theirs. My nervous system learning safety helps their nervous system feel safe. It's not instantaneous, and it doesn't guarantee outcomes, but it builds a bridge where before there was only repetition. I've seen relationships shift because of this. Bonds deepened, conflicts soften, not because the other person changed first, but because I changed how I showed up. That doesn't mean excusing harm or tolerating abuse. It means choosing to embody what I once longed to receive: patience, compassion, awareness. And every time I do that, every time I meet my own shadow and choose differently, I'm not just rewriting my story. I'm rewriting the loop for those I love too. Trauma time in relationships is relentless. Old wounds replay in new love. Partners become mirrors of parents. Loops entwine, amplify, repeat. But awareness gives choice. Once you see the loop, you can step sideways. You can refuse the script. You can write new endings. And when you face not just the wounds others gave you, but the shadow behaviors you've unconsciously carried forward, healing becomes mutual. Because healing isn't only personal. Through the mirror of connection, it spreads. The loops can dissolve not just in us, but between us. In the next part, we'll turn to repetition compulsion more directly, how the psyche seeks to resolve trauma by replaying it, how societies mirror this compulsion in politics and culture, and what it takes to interrupt the eternal return. Collective trauma as historical time collapse trauma isn't just personal. It lives in bodies, yes, but bodies live inside families, communities, nations, and cultures. And just as individuals loop back into the past, so too do societies. Whole groups collapse time, carrying wounds from centuries ago into the present moment. Wars, colonization, slavery, pandemics, political betrayals, they don't vanish when the news cycle moves on. They linger in nervous systems, in family stories, in rituals and silences, in how one generation raises the next. Trauma becomes historical time collapse, the past breaking into the present, not just for one person, but for millions. The idea of chosen trauma psychoanalyst Vamik Volkan coined the term chosen trauma, a collective wound so powerful that a group carries it for centuries. It becomes a central identity marker. Examples include the Holocaust for Jewish communities, the legacy of slavery for African diasporas, colonial dispossession for indigenous peoples, the partition of India, the Irish famine, and the Armenian genocide. These aren't just historical events. They become psychic anchors. Each new crisis reactivates the wound. Each perceived insult or betrayal resonates with centuries of memory. The trauma collapses time, making yesterday feel like today. Epigenetics and inherited pain science now supports what survivors have long known. Trauma can be inherited. Epigenetic research shows that stress alters gene expression. Children of Holocaust survivors, for instance, show differences in cortisol regulation compared to control groups. Descendants of famine survivors have higher rates of metabolic disorders. Trauma leaves biological traces, but inheritance isn't only molecular, it's behavioral. Children grow up inside parents' trauma loops. Hypervigilance teaches hypervigilance. Silence teaches silence. Distrust teaches distrust. Without knowing why, children carry forward the body memory of what came before. The loop becomes generational. Historical loops in action history shows us trauma repeating. After World War I, punitive measures against Germany seeded resentment that fueled World War II. The scars of colonialism re-emerge in cycles of political instability and resistance. Racial violence in the United States echoes slavery's shadow, erupting again and again in new forms. Each time, the past collapses into the present. The loop isn't broken, it's replayed on a larger stage. Scenario: collective tension in the room. I felt collective trauma not just in history books, but in lived experience. There have been times I've walked into a room and felt the tension before anyone spoke. A glance exchanged, a silence stretched too long, and my gut told me, something happened here before I arrived. Later, I'd learn the story: a betrayal, an argument, a conflict. My body knew it before my mind did. This is how collective trauma operates. Just as individuals sense unsafety through neuroception, groups transmit tension through microsignals. Mirror neurons fire not just between two people, but across communities. The nervous system doesn't need words. It knows. Governments, media, and manufactured loops, trauma loops, aren't only inherited naturally. They can be manipulated. I've written before about how governments project, gaslight, and divide. In the UK, I saw this in the way Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the media labelled ordinary citizens far right for defending their homes, livelihoods, and communities. This wasn't just politics. It was psychological abuse on a scale. When leaders use projection, they activate collective trauma loops. They silence dissent by reactivating old fears of being ostracized, demonized, excluded. They manipulate collective neuroception, the nervous system's sense of safety, so people align with the abuser for survival. The media reinforces the loop by showing only one side of the story. Dissenters are vilified. Authority figures are sanctified. The past repeats. Elites controlling narratives, ordinary people dismissed or punished. The result is collective gaslighting. Just as in an abusive relationship, victims begin to question their own perception. The body knows it's unsafe, but the narrative says, "You're imagining it." The conflict between felt truth and imposed story is devastating, not just individually, but societally. The collective nervous system. It helps to think of society itself as a nervous system. The amygdala is the media, constantly scanning for danger, amplifying threat. The hippocampus is education, tasked with remembering history, though often distorted. The prefrontal cortex is public discourse, trying to regulate emotion with reason, but easily hijacked. When societies are healthy, these systems balance. When trauma dominates, fear overrides memory and reason. The result is reactionary politics, polarization, and mob violence. We live inside a collective body. And when that body carries unresolved trauma, everyone feels the tremors. Philosophical reflections on collective loops. Philosophers, too, have seen societies looping. Hegel. History moves through dialectical struggles, but trauma repeats until synthesis is achieved. Nietzsche warned of eternal return, not only individually but culturally, the same wars, the same mistakes. Walter Benjamin wrote of history as a pile of wreckage blown forward by the storm of progress. Trauma doesn't vanish, it accumulates. From a Buddhist perspective, societies are trapped in samsara, cycles of suffering that repeat until awareness interrupts. From indigenous traditions, unresolved harm to land and ancestors reverberates through present generations until restored. All point to the same truth. Trauma loops are not just personal, they are civilizational. Personal reflection, feeling the collective loop. For me, this isn't theoretical. I feel collective trauma in my own body. When governments manipulate, when media gaslight, when communities fracture, I sense the same tension I felt as a child in conflict-ridden rooms. My chest tightens, my gut churns. My nervous system knows the pattern: dismissal, silencing, projection. It's like society itself is replaying my personal loop, and I can't help but feel it on both levels. At times, it's overwhelming. It feels like carrying not just my own pain, but the weight of collective despair. But I also know that awareness here matters. If I can name the loop, I don't have to drown in it. And maybe, if enough of us name it, we can begin to interrupt it together. Skeptical voices. Some scholars caution against overextending collective trauma. Not every political conflict is a trauma replayed. Not every cultural struggle is about inherited wounds. Sometimes they argue people fight simply over resources, interests, or ideology. This skepticism is valuable. Seeing everything as trauma risks fatalism. It risks excusing harmful behavior as unresolved pain. But ignoring collective trauma risks perpetuating it. Without reckoning, history doesn't disappear. It festers. The challenge is balance, to see when trauma shapes society without reducing society entirely to trauma, breaking collective loops. So how do groups step out of historical time collapse? Acknowledgement, truth commissions, apologies, memorials, naming what happened. Education, teaching history accurately, not sanitized. Rituals, collective mourning, remembrance, symbolic repair. Restorative justice, repairing harm through accountability, not denial. Awareness in leadership, recognizing projection and refusing manipulative narratives. These practices are to society what grounding and journaling are to individuals, ways of saying, this is now, not then. Trauma time isn't just personal, it's collective. Whole societies collapse in time, replaying wars, betrayals, and silences. Governments exploit the loopholes. The media amplifies them. History becomes present, not past. But recognition opens the door to change. Just as individuals can step out of loops by naming them, so too can cultures. It takes courage, truth, and compassion, but it's possible. In the next part, we'll turn to practice, how individuals and communities can reclaim the present. Grounding, orienting, journaling, rituals, tools that teach the nervous system and societies too, that now is not then. Practices for reclaiming the present. We've spent this episode tracing how trauma bends and breaks time, how the amygdala floods the present with the past, how dissociation makes hours vanish, how flashbacks collapse decades into seconds, how relationships echo childhood, and how whole societies replay centuries-old wounds. But awareness without practice can leave us overwhelmed. To live outside the loop, we need anchors, embodied practices that remind the nervous system. This is now, not then. These practices aren't abstract. They're physical, grounded, daily acts that interrupt the collapse. Think of them as temporal anchors, tools to tell the body the danger has passed, the loop isn't the whole story. Grounding in the present grounding is the first line of defense against trauma time. When the body is pulled back into the past, grounding reorients it to the here and now. Basic practice, place both feet on the floor. Notice the surface beneath you. Feel your spine supported by the chair. Name 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. This sensory inventory interrupts the loop. It says to the amygdala, we are here, not there. Orienting, the nervous system's natural reset animals do this instinctively. After a threat, they pause, look around, orient to their environment, and only then return to calm. Humans forget to orient. Trauma teaches us to stay braced. Orienting practice. Slowly turn your head left to right. Let your eyes scan the space. Notice the light, colors, and movement. Let your body register safety cues. This calms the vagus nerve, inviting the body back into social connection. Journaling as temporal anchor writing bridges memory and presence. Trauma jumbles timelines. Journaling restores sequence. Exercise. Write about an overwhelming event in 2 columns. Column 1, what I felt in my body. Column 2, what was actually happening around me. This creates distance, separating sensation from story. Over time, it retrains the hippocampus to file memories properly. Rituals of release trauma isn't just cognitive. It's stored in the body. Rituals help discharge what words cannot. Movement rituals. Shaking, dancing, stretching, letting the body finish survival responses it couldn't at the time. Fire rituals. Writing down loops, burning the paper, symbolically ending the return. Water rituals. Immersing hands, face, or whole body in water, signaling renewal. Cultures worldwide use ritual to process collective trauma. Individuals can too. Breathwork and temporal rhythm. The breath is the body's metronome. Trauma disrupts rhythm. Shallow, rapid breaths signal danger. Conscious breath restores temporal order. 4-7-8 breath. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. This lengthens the exhale, engaging the parasympathetic system. Box breathing. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4. This steadies the nervous system, creating a sense of safe containment. Breath tells the body, the loop is ending. Community is co-regulation. No one heals loops alone. Just as trauma often comes through relationships, so too does healing. Practices of co-regulation. Sitting with a trusted friend, sharing breath and silence. Group grounding circles, where everyone orients together. Storytelling rituals, breaking the silence of chosen traumas. These practices echo what indigenous and spiritual traditions have always known. Healing is communal. Personal reflection, my anchors for me. Reclaiming the present has meant piecing together anchors one by one. I've journaled through the long nights when old memories wouldn't stop looping. I've walked outside barefoot on the earth to remind myself I'm alive here now. I've practiced breathwork when anxiety surged, not as an instant cure, but as a reminder. My body has rhythms deeper than fear, and I've learned the power of community. Speaking the truth of my loops, even when shaking, has anchored me more than silence ever did. Hearing others share their stories has shown me I'm not alone. My trauma isn't unique, and neither is my healing. These anchors don't erase trauma. They don't pretend the past didn't happen, but they stop the past from owning the present. They loosen the grip of the loop, giving space for choice. Skeptical voices, are practices enough? Critics might ask, Can grounding, breath, or journaling really undo centuries of trauma? The answer is no, not alone. Practices aren't panaceas. They don't erase injustice or heal systemic wounds. They are tools for survival, not substitutes for social change. But they matter. Without them, trauma consumes the present entirely. With them, survivors gain strength to demand justice, to build healthier communities, to resist manipulation. Practices are the soil from which larger change grows. Bringing body and history together, practices for reclaiming the present aren't just for individuals. They can be scaled. National days of remembrance, collective breathing or silence rituals at protests, public storytelling projects, trauma-informed schools and workplaces. These collective anchors tell societies, we remember, but we are also here. They keep the past acknowledged without letting it devour the present. Practices matter because they give us choice. Trauma loops collapse choice, trapping us in the eternal return. Grounding, journaling, breathwork, ritual, community. These are ways to reopen time. They don't erase the past, but they stop it from being the only story. They say to the nervous system, the loop is not all there is. We've traveled far in this episode. We've seen how trauma collapses time in the brain, in the body, in relationships, and in whole societies. We've explored how flashbacks and dissociation bend the present, how loops replay in love, how nations carry chosen traumas, and how practices can anchor us back to now. The thread through it all is this. Trauma makes the past present, but awareness and practice can make the present real again. If you've recognized yourself in these loops, I invite you to pause here. Feel your breath. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Whisper to your body, this is now, not then. Because every time you do, you interrupt the loop. You reclaim a piece of your life. In our next episode, we'll go deeper into the mystery of memory itself. Episode 13, Emotional Flashbacks Without Images. We'll explore why some memories return not as pictures, but as raw feeling, sudden despair, rage, or dread in the middle of ordinary life. We'll look at the physiology of emotional flashbacks, from cortisol to the vagus nerve, and we'll reflect on how to separate past threat from present context. Until then, you've been listening to The Body Knows. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for recognizing the loops. And remember, the body knows James Miller.